I just don't think it's plausible that there are man-sized frogs.
What do you mean man-sized? We're a multiracial city. Do you mean dragonborn man or halfling man?
I don't know, I've never taken a census.
You guys talking about the census? Wild stuff, ho? What? No, we're talking about the frog country.
I'm saying it's like just a name. Like the Shatterfolk. It's not an area populated by shattered folk, is it?
Isn't it? It isn't.
And Griebus here is saying there's man-sized frogs.
Person-sized.
Person-sized frogs. Sure. Just big frogs walking around.
Oh, like bullywogs?
Gruvold's dry ears. No, that's from the Fabulous Imagination tome by Glorious Gygax.
Oh, Departments and Drudgery? That's very popular on Wizard Vision. Bullywogs aren't real?
No.
What about tieflings? I'm a tiefling.
Oh, really?
What did you think the horns were?
Oh, I just mean I don't like sea horns, you know what I mean? Protrusions.
So tieflings are real, but bullywogs aren't real? But frogs are real. Person-sized ones, I mean. I saw one at Bride Market the other day.
It was probably a homunculus.
Those aren't real.
The early episodes of Fat Albert featured live-action segments where Bill Cosby would directly address the audience.
Yes.
Did you know that it was inspired by real people, including Fat Albert himself?
I used to really love Bill Cosby. Mum had a whole bunch of his records. I used to, growing up, listen to those records on a chair. Really, really hit me hard to discover that he was a vile piece of shit.
But no Fat Albert episode ever got into that, which is so weird.
Well, actually, before we go into sort of our various propagandas and so forth, we really ought to do our proper ready, setting, go and have a quick recap and thought about our previous episode.
Brilliant. So I recall that during the previous episode, we were actually going to talk about various propaganda
Yes.
and things like that. And then we both forgot.
Properly forgot.
Well, yeah.
Ready, setting, go. Never changes.
I talked about the different burgs of South Heliakon.
Yes, you got rather geographical, didn't you?
I got quite geographical. And also the Western Bloodwoods.
Yes, and the
Frog Country.
The Frog Kingdom, or Frog Country.
Yeah. I really enjoyed doing that, and I liked all your additions to the frogs because it gave me more frogs.
The frogs are great. Frogs are fantastic.
I'm actually honestly kicking myself. I feel like we should have just made this a frog-based setting.
Maybe that's season 2. We just, maybe the next season of Heliakon is just going to be Heliakon Frog Country. Yeah.
I feel like frogs do a lot of like weird things biologically that would be interesting to explore in a setting.
And you sort of have the whole like arrow frog thing where they extrude poison, so like other species can't touch you. You sort of have Rogue from X-Men thing going on.
Like you can only lick some of the X-Men.
You can lick anything at least once.
That's true. You heard it right here, folks. You can lick any of the X-Men. That's legal now.
Whereas I did a bit of a deep dive on the Winnowed, our version of the undead.
I like hearing anything about the Winnowed, anything about the undead in any setting, basically. They always tend to be sort of my favorite things to read about and talk about. I'm not sure why that is.
Fascination with death, which is something that many creative people have been fascinated with over the years.
Because of depression. And it's the only way out. I'm not a proponent of it, but, I understand. Yeah.
So perhaps we should go into what we're doing for today with some fable fodder.
Some fable fodder.
Fable fodder never changes.
Right before we get into it, I think I did this wrong. So let's have a think about how I could have done it wrong. Let me tell you how I did it before we get into it, because I want this to be on record. So what I did is I have had this material for a couple months now where it was kind of a two-pronged approach, talking about propaganda, but in the Unfettered League specifically. And it was by first introducing an espionage agency that had historically something to do with the propaganda wing. I did nothing on the Great Consociate Empire except that little bit I put in about the Ministry of Truth, which may or may not exist.
I didn't come into this being like one-sided. I think we definitely got the wrong end of the stick somewhere. So okay. I thought we were both doing from both sides. However, I do have probably a slightly bigger chunk of stuff on the Great Consociate, but I didn't end up doing this. I really wish we do this and jump to conclusions, but since we started, started, I sort of started thinking about propaganda, and I had in my head James Bond and Atomic Blonde and dropping pamphlets out of aeroplanes into building.
I was definitely thinking about pamphlets for sure.
Mm-hmm. But where I ended up was quite a long way from there.
That's interesting. Interesting.
Because I started to think about, like, well, what is propaganda? It's just a way a culture is telling itself what it is. Propaganda is just sort of one weird, kind of ugly arm of that, and there's quite a lot more to the way a culture tells itself what it is. And I ended up in a much more organic place, I suppose.
That's quite an interesting deep dive there. I think I did almost the opposite, where I went, it's like, what does propaganda just look like? And then I went with that.
Cool. Well, let's see where we conflict and get into this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's start with this little bit of a, I guess, side bit. I wrote this whole thing and it kind of historically works together. So I'm hoping that it's a case of killing two birds, one stone. Let me introduce you firstly, Aaron, to the Society of Glass Vultures. There are fewer organised fraternities in the Unfettered League than in the Great Consociate Empire, but they still exist, and the Society of Glass Vultures is definitely one of the most well-known and poorly understood of these institutions. Outwardly, the Society is a club for the wealthy elements of society who wish to promote charity and egalitarianism, often making large public donations to orphanages, workhouses, and hospitals. They often host events such as the annual Soup Deluge and the Great Heliakon Eagle Race, where they fundraise for the poor and struggling of the League. But there is a different side to the Society of Glass Vultures, a rumour given credence only by the drunk and the mad. The Society is, in fact, a front for the League's espionage agency. Led by the elusive and possibly non-existent Carrion Minister, the Glass Vultures are spies with assets across the continent of Delmarin, collectors of knowledge both big and small. There is no fact in the world that is not interesting to some member of the Society, and in reality the quantity of information the organization holds is almost as vital as its quality. To this end, there are several specific positions within the agency which reflect this voracious obsession with the gathering and cataloging of data. The Scroungers, Raptors, and Buzzards are three distinct levels and castes of operatives which keep the knowledge of the Society. Each is trained and informed independently by the small and secretive Carrion Committee. The Scroungers are the most numerous members of the Society, and they are inducted after a traumatic period of semi-religious indoctrination. Their primary job is to keep meticulous records of seemingly mundane things, lest they become important at a later date. The route a local baker's apprentice takes each morning is as vital in theory as the menu changes of a well-known tavern or the daily gossip of the washerwomen down the street. Scroungers know that most of the information they record will not be useful in the short term, but they hold sacred the idea that every mote gathered is a reflection of a sacred and fundamental truth that exists somewhere within the heavenly realms of the gods. In their minds, and by the doctrines of their order, they are piecing together a puzzle that will one day reveal a world bereft of secrets. The Raptors are high society operators who are mostly concerned with the socio-political sphere. They gather information from politicians, priests, nobles, landowners, and anyone else likely to be at a fancy party or pseudo-intellectual debate session. They do not hold to the beliefs of the Scroungers and are trained primarily to see themselves as patriots and soldiers on a brand new front in the war against the anti-luminarchist, pro-recreationist threat of the Great Consociate Empire. This class of spy is classified as the true believer caste of the organization. Nevertheless, if required, they are kept honest and in line by an intricate web of lies, indiscretions, and secrets which ensure their loyalty and cooperation. Thirdly are the Buzzards, who are asked to drink deep of the Carrion Committee's black nectar, a liquid retrieved long ago from the world's grave layer of the ancient city of Heliakon in the deep north of Delmarin. This liquid, ingested also by committee members upon their days of ascension, allows them, with some effort, to share a mind space they call the Grey Roost. Here, for brief moments, they are able to speak only the truth as they understand it, and reveal to their brethren snippets of their memories as vivid experiences. The Buzzards tend to be magic users, and the espionage they participate in tends towards the mystical. They are primarily concerned with the concept of a primordial extinction paradigm, an idea, artifact, structure, or weapon created in the deep past with the potential to end civilization. The Carrion Committee itself is convinced the Great Consociate Empire is either in possession of such a thing, or like them searching for it. It was research by the Buzzards of the Society of Glass Vultures which first uncovered the truth behind the Brazen Dome. Not that they they've told anyone about it yet. The society is led by the carrion minister, a figure described as a tall, muscular humanoid clad in smooth black feathers with a hooked, beaked mask upon their face. But few have claimed to have met this individual, and so the rumor is that the carrion minister either does not exist or is a persona adopted by members of the carrion committee when needed. This is the first part. This feeds into the second part, which is about the Bureau for the Propagation of Virtuous Principles.
Fascinating, because I came up with an idea for a Bureau of Propaganda, and the name is not entirely dissimilar, although I already like yours more, so we'll come to that. I also can definitely see some fascinating connections that I think ought to be drawn between the carrion, the glass vultures, I should say, and the Stygian Council.
Stygiad Council.
Stygiad, yes. There's two sides of the same coin or opposing forces, I think, in there somewhere.
Definitely. I think one of the things I mentioned as well in episode 7 is I think there's some crossover between the different spy agencies. And I think at a certain level there might be sort of a more, maybe not friendly, but a more understanding nature of that relationship.
One another than they do with anybody else.
Anyone else, yeah, exactly right.
All right. I want to start in a location that is, in a topic that is near and dear to your heart.
Fat Albert?
Close, very close.
Neon Genesis Evangelion.
Education.
Oh, yeah, whatever.
As I think education is where a great deal of where culture starts, and it turned out to be sort of the base for where primary forms of propaganda occur.
Okay.
So,
let's do it.
Education in the Great Consociate. While the Great Consociate contains the most respected and oldest educational academies, universities, and colleges, their basic education for the majority is handled almost exclusively by the temples of Grunwald. Commoner adolescents attend a temple several days a week where they are taught literacy, numeracy, geography, a little politics, and a great deal of history. Religious instruction is handled during the broader temple services, so there's no particular care taken during the lessons. There's also an emphasis on care for the body as well, with classes beginning and ending with stretches and exercise and lectures on health. This service is free, and so it's not unusual at all for the children of wealthy craftspersons and a street urchin to attend the same class. This aspect of consociate culture has actually reduced extreme poverty wherever the consociate conquers and the temple flourishes.
Yeah.
However, whilst the monks and clerics administer tests to determine where their students are struggling, there are no formal qualifications or graduations, despite irregular pushes to institute some. Once a student has mastered what the temple teaches, they are asked to look elsewhere for further study to allow more time for the other students. Most leave well before this occurs to work alongside a profession in an apprenticeship or similar type role. The temples only teach the basic foundational and functional things, so whilst some continue to practice the skills that they have learned, most commoners in the consociate are very basic readers and poor at sums. The history and continuity of the consociate from the concordate, along with the origin of Grunwald, do have an extreme emphasis and are primarily taught through plays, something that I will discuss further later on in Fable Fodder.
Oh, I like that a lot.
Noble children receive their instruction primarily within the home, from tutors drawn from the temple, graduates of learning institution, and the occasional family member. Their curriculum is usually tailored by parents to prepare the child to take up the role decided by said parents.
That's fair.
Yeah, right? That's how it should be, right?
I really like that. And I find that interesting because it did not occur to me. It makes so much sense for that to happen. Like for that temples to have that role as facilities for education.
Now, I've got a similar link section for the Unfettered League. The League has educated its young in schools for nearly a century now, though it is only since the Bloody Avenues Agreement that this has been true for the majority of the youth, as the economics of war didn't allow for it. Schools are founded and funded by politically active benefactors that will then bear their name and receive rote appreciation at the beginning of each school day. Here, students will attend 5 days a week through the normal working hours and are expected to master a broad range of subjects. Students are tested at the end of each year before being allowed to progress, although there is very little stigma attached to failure, as many species mature at different rates. There are 3 possible graduations for students in League schools. After 5 successful tests, the student is expected to be literate, numerate, aware of their civic responsibilities, and have a general grasp of the world around them. They receive a quill pin to approved their basic education, and many moved directly into junior positions at this point. After another 3 years of successful testing, they receive a second quill pin and are expected to be capable of working in a clerical or bureaucratic role immediately. There has been a slow increase in the number of students achieving this level. A final 2 tests passed in a school, often having the student require to travel to a different facilities as not all schools cater to this level. The student then receives their third quill and normally moves directly into further study at an institute of higher learning. There is a fee attached for each year of study that does go up with each quill trying to be achieved. It is a fairly modest fee, but it has led to a class of the uneducated poor. There are programs to assist them with scholarships and the like, but these are far from universal and is an ongoing problem. As even a single quill graduate is a competent reader, there is a growing demand for things to read, which is something I'll also talk about in a bit.
Oh, very good. I like that.
We've come from 2 wildly different angles so far.
Okay. Well, I don't mind that because I don't think that actually so far contradicts much of what I have down here. So
right. Well, that was my sort of the foundation I'm standing on for my rest of my propaganda stuff. So I'm now very interested to hear what you have to say, where these vultures are going.
Let's now talk about propaganda, the Bureau for the Propagation of Virtuous Principles. The history of the Society of Glass Vultures is a long and complicated one, but one thing above all else defines their presence in modern League society, and that is their involvement with the propaganda wing of the Grand Council of the League. The two are intimately tied, as it was by the political necessity of a unified nationalistic narrative that the Carry-On Committee sought to change the hearts and minds of the League's citizenry. When it became clear in the Great War against the Consociate that the appetite for slaughter was on the wane, the espionage agency proposed a new initiative to the Grand Council, the Bureau for the Propagation of Virtuous Principles, most commonly referred to now as the Bureau of Virtue. There was a clear need to recalibrate the socio-political stance of the unfettered League's population to drive home how different and uniquely blessed they were in comparison to the foreign Consociate and its vassal states. The formation of the Bureau created some friction between the Society of Glass Vultures and the Grand Council of the League, and so it was that the Carry-On Committee formally relinquished control of the organization to be headed by one of the council members, a dragonborn named Asher Khalig. Asher has headed the Bureau now for just over 30 years, weathering no fewer than 6 coup attempts by various warring factions within her government, as well as 2 rather clever poisonings. Once a pragmatic and level-headed individual, the years appear to have taken a toll on her, and she has become of late obsessed with the concept of creating a perfected society through strict, careful decrees. Her organization's increasingly restrictive recommendations and paranoid propaganda have not gone unnoticed, and it is only a matter of time, some say, before her eccentric obsessions make of her a liability to the League. The Bureau of Virtue has a broad mandate to ensure the proper education of citizens in politics as a matter of national interest. Primarily, this is achieved through a 3-pronged approach composed of the following directives: education, press, and philosophy. Under the directive of education, places of learning are subjected to regular audits of their curriculum materials. This ensures only the right luminarchist philosophies are taught, and that the more even-handed interpretations of recent history are abandoned in favor of examinations more favorable to the League. Under this umbrella, schools, military academies, universities, and those mystic organizations open to the public are regularly surveyed. Failure to comply results in funding limitations, staff redistribution, and, in some severe cases, re-education. No one wants to be sent to Sibenak City. They've all heard the stories. At its most basic level, the Bureau decrees that all right-minded children are expected to know the anthem, Freedom's Illustrious Declaration. At a minimum, all adults are expected to be able to recite the 10 virtuous recommendations of the Grand Council, and if they can come up with a range of ways the recommendations have improved their lives, all the better. The directive of the press is likewise a broad one. Traditionally, news in the lands of the Unfettered League was distributed by town criers in the less literate areas and far-flung villages. Much of it was rather slow to make it from the central and important cities and the Grand Council to every corner of the League. In the modern age, and with the growing number of literate citizens, much information is these days printed in pamphlets. Town criers still used have been rebranded as council heralds, and news is a tightly controlled trickle filtered through the Bureau of Virtue's many local and regional offices. This information must adhere to a certain standard, and there are topics which are deemed to be against the public interest. These include ideas critical of the League's rulership, organizations and citizens, as well as anti-Luminarchist propaganda, which in the modern age can include some quite pro-Luminarchist thought, now branded extreme or contrary to the philosophies of the League's founders. Popular and encouraged opinion items include degenerate rulers of the Great Consociate Empire, the Consociate war machine and its warmongering military, illegal naval exercises in the Sea of Serenity, and imperialist propaganda and the brainwashing of the Consociate's hapless citizenry. Finally, the Bureau for the Propagation of Virtuous Principles has a third vital mandate, and that is its philosophy wing. Though philosophy itself is shameful and useless, a pursuit for depraved layabouts and madmen who dwell in barrels, the practice has of late undergone a bit of a redemption arc. The League has clarified its position that although once considered a form of divine directive, Luminarchy is at its heart a pure philosophy and able to be studied. From this idea was born the virtue officer class of the Bureau, essentially propaganda commissars seconded to the military as well as large organizations and select neighborhood councils in order to ensure compliance to government standards of conduct. Each carries a grey-covered booklet with the 10 virtuous recommendations of the Grand Council, as well as the 30 upright actions of the unfettered citizen, a recent addition to the Bureau, and one of Asher Khalid's controversial initiatives. No one is quite sure how far their mandate extends, though already it seems some of them have stepped over whatever invisible line may exist within the Unfettered League's society.
Interesting. We have some lovely dovetailing with what I talked about with education, but we do also have a little bit of conflict with what I have.
Ooh, okay. Let's
Yummy.
do that. This might be a proper world war word.
Yeah, right. So, yes, I was going to talk about the Great Consociate side, but I'm going to leave that to the end. Is that the last piece of fable fodder you had?
That's the last piece of fable fodder I have,
Cool.
yeah.
So I'm going to, talk about the Unfettered League stuff right away because I want you and our listeners to hear my take and
Yeah,
the
let's do
areas
it.
where we differ. To read is to light a fire. Fragment of a Victor Hugo quote because he's neat. Books are rare and expensive on Delmarin, though that is slowly changing in the Unfettered League. Most books are written or copied by hand, as printing currently requires each page to be laboriously etched into metal or wood and then stamped onto paper with a hand press. The initial cost to set this up is so high, only a few books ever receive that privilege. However, one of the designs recovered from the mid-vaults in Heliakon 12 years ago by a League team of delvers was for a hand-cranked printing engine. The leaders of the Unfettered League saw the possibilities immediately and have invested heavily in the new technology. They did so because it is widely accepted that Luminarchism itself took off because of the old style of printing. The first Luminarchists carved their arguments, rants, creeds, and screeds into whatever they could find and hand-pressed them onto cheap rag pulp paper to make pamphlets by the hundred. These were then handed out, nailed up, and thrown into crowds. Only a few would be convinced, but they reached so many that it started a wave that would eventually crest with the Unfettered League. With a very literate populace now, and a demand for the material greatly outstripping the supply, the council stepped in to support this burgeoning business of printing. With League support came League expectations, and the first books printed were chosen by the nascent Bureau of Ideals. You and I really do ring similar in some places.
We really do. Can we just say, I just want to make this very clear that this is absolutely the first time that I have heard anything that Aaron has done on this topic, and as the framework for this podcast is the first time that Aaron has heard any of this from me. So,
Absolutely.
I mean, there you go. Two hearts beating as one.
Absolutely. Two minds thinking as one. Well, one-ish.
Yeah, one-ish.
One of the delvers who discovered the printing engine, called Serzeyns, rather than making books, is now making slimmer volumes of no more than 30 to 40 pages. Each content for these books would be themed with either stories and reports from delvers in one, essays on politics in another, and collections of short and exciting adventures in another. These Serzeyns, as they've become to be known, have been wildly popular with the populace and have exploded across the League and are a popular export to other nations, except probably, let's face it, the Great Consociate. The Bureau of Ideals publishes a monthly Serzeyns of its own, only possible with the wealth of the League behind them, called New Ideals in Action, that summarizes recent events from a certain point of view. We have some contradictions there, but I definitely see there's a way forward to make these two mesh.
Yeah, I think there's some small contradictions, but, you know, the world is a contradictory place. Yeah, okay. I think our points of difference are actually quite small there. I think these ideas are more ideas that could potentially work together unless we have some particular challenges to them.
They're different but potentially complementary. We just need to work out how it all connects, I think.
Yeah,
but we can do that in our
absolutely.
next section,
Yeah,
as I still have a big chunk of stuff to talk about how the Great Consociate likes to propagandaize, propagandate.
Propagate? No, that's different. That's a different word.
Propagandaize.
How it likes to... Yeah, that's right.
The play's the thing.
Okay. Oh yeah, I see where you're going with this, I think.
One of the most popular forms of entertainment across all of Delmarin is the play. Every city has multiple playhouses, some catering to the wealthy and some to the hoi polloi. These will play host to one or more companies of professional thespians. Practically every tavern worthy of the name has a small stage that amateur groups will use to perform, or passing bards will recite well-known monologues upon. Travelling companies will have the materials to create stages in barns, halls, or even upon the local green. Within the Great Consociate, nobles will often act as patrons for a company of players who will begin and end each performance with a thanks to that individual or family. The conux of an area will also sponsor potentially several groups of thespians with tax money. The quality and quantity of the players is a measure for the ruling classes by the commoners. A stingy noble, or worse, a pair of conux, has led to civil unrest for lack of entertainments in the past. Part of this arrangement allows the patron to choose which plays are performed. As such, history plays that paint the rulers in the best of light and their enemies in the worst are the most popular fare amongst modern playwrights. There are a few older plays that are considered classics and are the vehicle by which the foundational myth of the Great Consociate is spread. Theranax's The Last Pillar, that tells of the fall of the Concordate, The Book of Blood and Brass by the Milledon sisters as an epic romance set during the height of the Concordate, and Gruvald's life and ascension is told in the Sparaxian saga, which is attributed to the nameless last acolyte of Gruvald, and is regularly quoted during sermons in temples across Delmarin. These classic plays are performed in part or whole by children, amateurs, and professionals consistently across the Great Consociate. Even before the war with the Unfettered League, the principles of the Luminarchists threatened the hegemony of the nobles and led to a new and still wildly popular form of play. The genre was swiftly known as loony loomies, and are comedies depicting idiotic luminarchists creating elaborate and foolish schemes which come crashing down around their ears due to the probity, cleverness, and natural authority of a noble or a loyal servant to one. A great deal of slapstick, pratfalling, and crude humour is involved. Within the Unfettered League, groups of thespians are usually owned by the actors, playwrights, and hands themselves. Most are travelling groups that have new folk buy in and others buy out as often as they tour. It's steady work and quite profitable, but only a few do it for any length of time. Some are successful enough to purchase or construct a theatre in a city, often with the assistance of a local business person. Leaguers have a different palette for their plays than their cousins in the Consociate. For example, historicals are generally miserable tragedies and are subsequently less popular, although the ones about the recent war tend to do better. Fantastical stories about adventurers and delvers always fare well with the public, as do comedies that lampoon nobility and wealthy alike.
I see that. Yeah, that works. I like it very much, Aaron.
I meant to come in with this idea of coming out with, ministries of truth, but I ended up writing about, art again. Sorry.
I mean, it's interesting because, of course, I was reading a few years ago about how the Soviet Union worked and how the various propaganda worked. And yeah, that did have a lot to do with plays and art and things like that. So, every city or town of any size would have like a cultural hall of the people where there would be murals of like the traditional life of these people and now their current like Soviet life. And it would like mesh so well together in theory in these wonderful spaces. There would be loads of plays and musicals about, they were not so heavy handed, right? But, there was always that idea of like, oh man, in the past, everything sucked. Oh, it's so great the Soviet Union came in. Anyway, here's a love story about people that you relate to. And that's the background, that's interesting.
A great deal of the Shakespearean historical plays are directly, this is where I got the inspiration in many ways from, because he was receiving money from the crown and he had some expectations that he would paint the crown in a positive light. More recently, of course, most people are aware of Hitler's obsession with the film industry, and it's
actually a lot of dictators that really like film in general. Like that's a weird obsession. Saddam Hussein.
Yeah.
He loved Hollywood movies specifically, didn't he? I know Kim Jong-un had some kind of like movie collection or something. Maybe they just like entertainment.
Yeah, well, I mean, we all do, but it is odd that there's this link there.
I mean, after you've flayed your 100th peasant for the week, I don't really know what they do. I mean, I think if I was a dictator, that's probably daily flayings would probably be something on my schedule.
Yeah.
I wouldn't put it there, but like, I don't know. Whoever organizes these things for me, they'd tell me what I enjoy. I think I could get behind that. Like if it was an ugly peasant, if it was like a really, really muscular, sexy peasant, I'd be like, nah, I don't like this. Peasants are people.
Remind me never to make you a governor or, ruler of any kind.
See, I feel like you're really disparaging me because I remember in, was it episode 7 when we were talking about things that you said that I should never be a god and now I can't even be a dictator?
No.
I'm trying to, reach for the stars here, Aaron, and, you're always putting me down. It's very upsetting.
I hope our friendship will survive it.
I'm leaving in all the Fat Albert facts in this recording because this is one of mine.
I assumed so.
He says,
well, we've
hey,
got
hey.
Shut up. We've got a little bit of work to do with our
Yeah, I think we do.
War of the Words.
We do, actually, yeah.
So let's fade away with the music and
let's fade away.
Work on that and return shortly.
Brilliant. We'll do this. Fizzling away.
World War Words never changes.
Welcome back to World War Words. Aaron, you fucking bastard. I'm going to kill you in this section.
Why are you welcoming my back? This is my front.
What?
You said welcome back, but this is my front. You're looking at my front, not my back. So I'm just confused is all.
This doesn't work in a audio medium, Aaron. I'm going to slit your throat. With words.
Yes, and of course that'll be a lot easier from the front.
Yeah, that's really funny.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me do 2 small bits, and then you do one of your chunks, and then I'll do one of my chunks, and then you do the other chunk.
That sounds like a reasonable allocation of chunks.
I feel like I've said the word chunk too many times.
Chunk.
Chunk.
Chunk away.
So, you wrote there that students are tested in the Unfettered League. After 5 successful tests, the students expected to be literate, numerate, aware of their civic responsibilities. Since the formation of the Bureau of Virtue, another test is administered before the first quill is given to a student. It's called the Young Patriot Civic Exam. Carefully curated questions meant to determine whether a student's politics and worldview are up to the standards the Bureau is working to instill. Many young people have, of late, been failing these increasingly restrictive and paranoid-sounding tests. Rumours abound that some exams are altered to contain questions for which there are no correct answers, and that some form of mystic analysis is utilised to determine the intent behind the words. Although this itself is contrary to the League's founding ideals, which hold the sanctity of an individual's character as vital above all else. After all, the Luminarchist founders of the League were themselves rebels, freethinkers, and agitators who would undoubtedly have failed these insane examinations.
Yeah, I do have a bit of a pushback with that one, I think, honestly.
Okay.
I genuinely like the idea, but I would actually move it back a little bit in that the first quill, there is absolutely a basic civic test, but it's relatively simple. I mean, ideally these would be in human terms, like 12 to 13-year-olds.
Oh, yeah. You're right, actually.
And I don't disagree that the weirder stuff would be that the more educated someone is, the more that the Bureau would see them as a potential threat. So that the second quill one is still pretty straightforward, but it does have perhaps one of these sneaky, pseudo-magical questions in there, whilst everybody who's taking that third quill is now struggling.
I think that's a very reasonable pushback there. I think that makes a lot of sense, even more sense than I thought initially it made. The other thing that I really enjoyed was when you were talking about the various plays in the Great Consociate Empire, you mentioned the Loony Loomies. And so I've just have a bit here. So one of the most popular Loony Loomy plays is Grungary's Folly. It follows a Luminarchist League council member named Grungery Flop, a foolish and easily led individual. He espouses the ideals of freedom of thought and the concept that all people, regardless of their station, can rise to positions of power and influence. It just so happens that a dim-witted farmer's daughter, Bragatha Stump, is chosen to replace him in one of the ridiculous closed elections the various League councils hold. She receives one extra vote, snuck in at the last minute by the scheming councilman Veervale Stormfault, who hated Grungery because they had never dined together at one of the many decadent and nevertheless disease-ridden cafes of the Unfettered League. In the end, Bragatha accidentally stabs Grungery with the end of her high-heeled shoes after Grungery finally admits he is in love with her. She is framed by Veervale as a murderess, and Veervale receives 2 Grand Council seats in return. The play is considered one of the funniest of Elgar Twimble's works, often thought of as the middle entry in an unofficial Loony Loomy trilogy, including Ill-Gotten Grains and The Hinkadink General.
I've been holding back the laughter this whole time to give you space to talk, but I love this.
Thank you. All right. And now it's time for Aaron's chunk.
So this was what grew out of the Society of Glass Vultures and a little bit what I mentioned at the end of the last segment about how they relate to the Stygiad. The world dies each day, and we are left to sift through its carcass and the field of corpses of every day that preceded it. We are those with the stomach to tear through the skin of illusion, consume the flesh of lies to reveal the clean bones of truth that lies within. It is through us that the truth is seen and known. We are the Society of Glass Vultures. Kind of wanted to justify the name because it's a kick-ass name. Sort of wanted to put it in a sort of
that's awesome
paradigm.
Yeah, I don't know why I chose that name. It just, again, like many things, came to me in a dream.
Not the toilet.
Not the toilet. It came to me in the toilet.
To the Society, truth is the end goal, and lies and illusions are just the filth that they are willing to use to get there. Their alignment with the Unfettered League was initially nothing more than an accident of geography, as the crucial city of Heliakon lay within their growing domain. But with the discovery that the children of the Stygiad, the now Stygiad Council, had aligned themselves with the Great Consociate, this welded the Society of Glass Vultures and the League closer together. The Glass Vultures and the various followers of the Stygiad have long been in opposition to one another, and the Society of Glass Vultures holds continuity from the Concordate era through the Carrion Minister. Because you see, the Minister is indeed real, but they're not a flesh and blood person. Perhaps it would be better to say that they're not just a flesh and blood person. You see, the Minister is the distilled truth of each person who has ever drunk the black nectar. More than just their memories, but less than their soul, all combined together and capable of being called down into a Carrion Committee member when they don the mask. Now, the Stygiad, in all its many forms over the millennia, has always embraced the power of the lie and the concealment of truth, as we discussed when we talked about the Stygiad. Not even the death of the powers behind the Stygiad has changed this. The Society of Glass Vultures has long held that the primordial extinction paradigm is in some way associated with those gods of the Stygiad, although the nature of this relationship is debated as much as the nature of the primordial extinction paradigm itself. Further, Glass Vultures reject the influence of all gods as illusion, as gods only wish to shape the world and not see it. It is somewhat ironic, then, that the nature of the Carrion Minister is closer to that of the gods than they realize, and is growing closer still with each person who drinks of the black nectar. Recently, the belief that the primordial extinction paradigm lies within the Great Consociate has been shaken badly, with the revelation of Councillor Nilkram's rot vaults and the reciprocal vaults being constructed by the Consociate. Some of the Carrion Committee now believe that this was an example of the primordial extinction paradigm in action, and it originates with their own ally, while others argue that, in fact, it is the result of Stygiad infiltration within the Unfettered League. It's always, it's always great when your intelligence service thinks you might be bad.
That is bad. I wish we had a thesaurus. My only thoughts on that is that I really love that. I really love how you wove those links together. I keep thinking throughout this whole process, I don't really push back against any of your ideas. It's mainly because I really like them. I feel like I'm swimming in a sea of just really, really good ideas. And, we can change things here or there a little bit, but overall, I think they work really, really well. It's really one of those things that supports the setting.
And we have well and truly reached that critical tipping point where things now keep naturally slotting into place with other things. We're starting to build that web of interconnected ideas and places and things and groups and individuals and philosophies, etc.
I mean, this is it. This is episode 9. So, that's why there's a lot of callbacks now to previous things, which I think is what we want.
And it's something for our listeners to think about when they're making their own settings, is that there's a lot of uphill work in that first half, but you do reach a point where things start to naturally flow together and it starts to feel very holistic and clever, like you came up with it all at once, but you don't. You do it like this, a bit at a time.
I think there's an interesting thought I want to talk about at the end of this, jumping to conclusions, and that's about how world building works for novels. Anyway,
excellent. Well, let's put a pin in that as you have a chunk.
This is my final bit. I really enjoyed your serzeyns. I thought they were great. So you were talking about a publication, the monthly serzeyne, New Ideals in Action, which summarizes recent events from a certain point of view, which I really liked. So this popular publication has actually led to some instability in the Unfettered League, representing a kind of push and pull struggle between Asher Colleague's Bureau and the Grand Council itself. A failure of communication or else an act of deliberate disruption occurred and New Ideals in Action became an unvetted and overnight success. They talked of fixing the faults of the League, a dangerous idea for it was an admittance of imperfection. They talked of open dialogue with neighbouring nations, and they outlined new and radical luminarchic thought. They carried the seal of the Grand Council itself, and it appears all other members of the ruling body contributed to the production and distribution of these pamphlets, all under Asher Colleague's nose. The serzeynes were initially printed in secret and distributed in bulk to every corner of the League. Many hundreds of thousands did not make it, for Asher's network has grown vast over the years. But a great deal did. It was as if the floodgates of possibility had opened. People were talking about ideas again and ideals, and the virtue officers were powerless to stop them. Of course, who could go against the word of the Grand Council? Here, Asher smells treachery in every corner, as well she should. The Grand Council has become somehow compromised, she feels. In truth, the other members of the Council have been rather horrified as to the extent of Asher's growing power, but its growth blindsided them completely. By the time it had become clear a new power block had formed in the League, there was little the Council could practically do. Purges have always been a terrible sign of weakness up top, and for the ruling body of the League to admit they had made a grave mistake installing one of their own as the director of the Bureau of Virtue would have been a step too far. The New Ideals in Action are printed frequently now. There is no real way for the Bureau to stop them without acting publicly against the Council, and that is another one of those things that simply isn't done. The truth is, there is a power behind the serzeynes, one with goals as clear as Asher's herself, a shadow bureau made up of members of the Society of Glass Vultures, trying to correct their mistakes and get the League back on track. In time, Asher and her paranoia will doubtless uncover the reality of it and move against the Society in some way, or perhaps the Glass Vultures will find some way of removing both her and her influence from the Bureau. Only time will tell.
Interesting. I also have some stuff in that similar vein, so let's see how well they mesh together, shall we?
Okay, let's see.
All right. So just a couple of these are more sort of semi-dot pointed. So first off is the idea that because you mentioned news being delivered in pamphlet form, I'd suggest that that is primarily used only for urgent news and is free. It is unwise to not take it from the junior virtue officers or their delegates, because refusing to take these sorts of news gets yourself put on a list. I had a thing about the New Ideals in Action being purchasable from approved vendors, but I'm dumping that entirely in favor of your awesomeness. So I'm just
okay. Thank you.
The term newzines are gaining ground in the League, first as shorthand for the serzeyne New Ideals in Actions, but now as a few other serzeynes trying to write about news is propping up, despite virtue officers continuing to try and jump on top of them, having more success with them because presumably it doesn't have society backing. Nevertheless, they're still having some success, and so there's a new genre of zine called the newzines. Do you like the term newzine?
I do. Okay. I mean, I think it works as a sort of progression of the term.
Yeah. Sibonacc City is where the Bureau of Virtue is sending recidivists. I'd just like to add that there is a great many charged and ready to use Wraith Quartz crystals coming from Sibonacc City, and most folk are very careful to never question where those osmotes are coming from.
Okay, yep.
Yes. The final part, I think most interesting, is that there was recently a highly public arrest by virtue officers of the playwright Magnatius Middlestone, a celebrated and remarkably popular figure famous for his extremely pointed and hilarious satirical plays. The dwarf was considered a near shoo-in for a political position he was running for as a reformer. Despite the incredible public backlash, the Bureau for the Propagation of Virtuous Principles has pushed back just as hard and is now lobbying the Grand Council to extend its own remit to include overseeing all art forms as a logical extension of Asher Kellig's work. Protesters and counter-protesters have come to violence, and the Grand Council is somewhat locked in debate, which I think actually works really well with.
Yeah. I was about to say that works quite well, I think, with that sort of struggle between those power blocks, I guess. Yeah.
There's some serious political instability going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. And this thing, the arrest of this playwright is symptomatic of that. Very good.
Yeah, I think we've actually got some really neat stuff going on there.
God, we're so smart. Why can't this be our job? This would be such a good thing to have as a job.
Yeah, it would. I don't suppose anybody else, like several thousand people, might agree with this. By the way, we have a Patreon.
And only one very foolish person is giving us money. And that foolish person, thank you. Thank you so much. Keep doing it. Triple it.
Yeah.
I mean, what I really want to find is like an old lady who could be my artistic patron. She listens to the podcast,
right?
But I'm not quite sure who she is. There is like the possibility that she will demand sexual favors at some point,
right?
But she dies before that happens, and she leaves me her fortune.
That is very specific and understandable desire, I think, in this modern day and age.
Thank you.
I think it'd make a great toy boy.
I think I would actually, yeah. I'm fun-loving. I love fun.
I don't suspect that your wife would approve, but maybe she'd understand that you just have to take one for the team.
Yeah. Hey, taking one for the team, does that always make you think of butt stuff?
No.
Okay, just me then. I think it's time for jumping to conclusions.
It is. Let's jump to conclusions and jump away from this topic.
Jumping to conclusions never changes.
My conclusion is that we've actually done a pretty damn good job over the past 2 episodes, especially because those are the 2 episodes that I remember the best because they are the most recent.
I was really glad that we ended up doing this one, the propaganda. I really came at the topic expecting to sort of come at the other end more in the vein of what you came out with, which was great and amazing, by the way. And was a little surprised at myself too.
But it is more traditional. Like it's a more traditional view of that kind of thing. It's a very kind of like, to me, there's not a super realistic conception of those things. It's just a sort of movie or like book idea of how those things actually worked. That's, in reality, it was more insidious and more subtle and continues to be more insidious and more subtle. Look at every Hollywood movie ever made with the military.
The fact that basically every print media here in Australia is owned by one man.
One ghoul, in fact.
Murdoch is certainly more ghoul than man at this point. It was interesting to discover that I went in wanting to do something fantastical and cool like you did, and ended up just sort of, writing about mostly art, as is my want.
That is something that you do. You do enjoy art. But that's the thing. I think we come at it from different perspectives, which is good. Anyway, actually, I wanted to just have a quick thing about world building as it kind of appears to someone who's the audience versus how it appears to like a writer, because I've been reading a lot of how various writers plot out their worlds and things like that. So I've read bits and pieces here, Brandon Sanderson, Joe Abercrombie, more sort of modern rather than Tolkien-esque kind of world building, because it is quite different, I feel. Tolkien was always on a different scale, but there's the way that it works for most authors is that they, like we're doing here, they come up with bits and pieces that only in retrospect kind of, they look, when you're reading it or when you're looking at that piece of art, only after the fact do they all make sense, right? But when that world is being created, there are a lot of things getting thrown at that wall, some of which don't eventuate, some of which are changed so much that they don't even resemble the first idea that the author had. This is true of like characters, plot, geography. All of that stuff is constantly in flux until it isn't. And a lot of that stuff is defined at these really odd points. Like, I don't remember who this one is actually, but I was reading recently about a guy who wrote a book, and the reveal that he had, there was like a clever reveal at the end that he wanted to put into his book. It was that his main character, God, who was it? Anyway, it doesn't matter. His main character had a particular trait that made him one of the special ones, and it was so good. And you went through the whole book like kind of suspecting it, and then he threw that out the window and he was like, no, it makes absolutely no sense. He's just going to be some random hobo. It's fine. And it made the work better for it, right? But when you're reading something like that, all of these decisions, you don't see any of that background stuff, right? So, which is why this podcast is us doing all of that background stuff, and a lot of that background stuff in front of a microphone, right? Like, we're putting all that stuff together. But also we have vast quantities of material that we are probably never going to use in this 12 episode series. Like, I was looking, I've got like a ridiculous amount. I've got like we'll probably share these maybe, or maybe not, depending if we go back to this.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I've got like 130,000 words of various things, right? but that's the thing, right? Like, some of it no longer fits what the world looks like now. Right? Like, some of it is good ideas that I might use for something else. Some of it, I had this whole thing about a particular resident of Melodwin, which makes absolutely no sense now, but it was one of the first things that I actually wrote for this thing. And I keep looking at it and going, this is really not that interesting anymore. So, you know.
I had something similar, and I might still revamp it. But I don't write out my full ideas. I have basically each month's document I have at the bottom of that, just to do this constantly slowly expanding list of titles and or bullet points for ideas I want to investigate and expand on. But I don't write them out in full until I'm ready to use them, in no small part because I do. Like, I go to sit down and write that idea out, and then I'm looking over increasingly number of these episodes, and it changes and evolves as I do it.
I mean, see, I have a lot of free time where I'm like sitting and waiting for a student to finish eating their lunch or something, and my only thing that I have to do at that point is just be a warm body in the room. So I'll do a lot of writing then, because it kind of takes my mind off how extremely dull the rest of my job is. But my document that I have is an absolutely schizophrenic collection. It makes absolutely no sense where things are. I sometimes I'll just write something and I find myself in between two things that are completely unrelated. So I have to do a lot of kind of find and replace function on Google Docs to work out where I am. And recently I found this whole bit that I wrote defining the main godly pantheon. And I was like, oh wow, this is pretty interesting. I have no memory of writing it. Absolutely no memory of writing it. It's pretty good though. I might use it next episode. Who knows? I was going to say, I will tell you, I do have one. Where is it? I do have one section that I started at some point and then also never finished, and it's just called "The Centipede Gods." That's it. There's nothing there. I don't remember what I was going to write about centipede gods. I don't think centipede gods really fit into this setting very well. I mean, they could somewhere, but that's it. That's not going to make it to any part of this. Maybe season 2.
The real travails.
All about centipedes.
Yep. Season 2, all centipedes. Yes, centipedes and frogs.
Centipedes and frogs.
Right?
Natural enemies.
Absolutely. Love it. We've done a at least an acceptable job, I don't believe.
I think we've done an absolutely amazing job.
Thank you very much for listening, and please do check in the notes below for links to the document, which has all of today's meanderings in it, and perhaps a little bit extra from the mini episodes. Also find our link to Patreon in there. Maybe you can join our one Patreon. Thank you, our one Patreon. We won't name you by name, even though we know who you are.
We know where you live.
I know which state he lives in, but I don't actually know where he lives.
We know the state you live in, and because Australia has a very low population, we can work it out.
Eventually, maybe. Yeah, let's leave this on a dire threat against the one person financially supporting us.
Do you feel bad for Fat Albert that he was so fat?
Oh, shut up about Fat Albert.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. Like and subscribe for the dystopia to be over. Shoot us a review so we know if we're doing the right thing. Or if you are illiterate, your grunts will suffice. Do you need a dungeon master in Adelaide? It is real and Aaron can do it. Follow the links. Follow the paper trails. Follow your nose. Goodbye.